Hey everyone, so for the better part of the past 2 weeks, I've been losing my mind over the lore of Enkanomiya. Given that I've been hyping up and theorizing about Enkanomiya for the past few months, I think it's time that we revisit this place now that it's released. With all the lore bombs from this patch, I'm sure that things might be a bit confusing. But luckily in today's video, I'll condense and summarize the lore of Enkanomiya as well as dive into a few theories regarding this ancient civilization. Now, before I start the video, I just want to give y'all 2 disclaimers. When it comes to the lore of Enkanomiya, we need to take things with a grain of salt. As we've seen from previous lore entries like the Serpent Drake of Tokoyo Koku, a lot of the information presented to us is not accurate. The narrators of these lore books are often unreliable and present biased information. So, when interpreting the lore, we must take everything with a grain of salt and remember that the stories we are hearing may have been altered in some way, shape, or form. Also, this video might be all over the place just because we have so much to cover when it comes to the lore of Enkanomiya. I actually rewrote the script a few times just because I didn't like how I structured the information, but I was able to figure it out and I think it's structured in a way that makes sense now. Either way, I've included timestamps down below to allow you guys to skip around if you would like to do so. And with all of that out of the way, let's get into the rest of the video. To really understand the lore and history of Enkanomiya, we have to go back to the very beginning, a time before the gods and even Celestia itself. According to the Byakuya Koku collection, the world was once ruled by a mighty race of dragons, which we know today as the Visheps. Amongst this race of dragons were 7 dragon lords known as the 7 sovereigns, who served as the rulers of this ancient world. At some point during this period of time, a being known as the Primordial One would invade this world of the 7 sovereigns. An intense and bitter war would break out between the Primordial One and the 7 Dragon Lords. During this war, the Primordial One would create beings known as the Shining Shades to aid them in battle. After 40 years of intense fighting, the Primordial One and its shades would defeat the 7 sovereigns, forcing the remaining Visheps to retreat below the mountains and under the seas. With dominion over the land, the Primordial One and one of its shades would set out to create and build the world as they saw fit. As the first humans came into existence, they would enter into a covenant with their creator, the Primordial One. The terms of the covenant are not exactly clear, however there is some sort of temptation that the people would need to resist. Anyways, under the watchful eye of the heavens, the humans would prosper and form a single unified culture. For a time, things were looking great. The heavens and humans coexisted in harmony. However, all of this would change with the invasion of the second throne of the heavens. With its arrival, the heavens collapsed and the earth churned as the Primordial One and its 3 shades battled this new imposter. As a result of this great disaster, Enkanomiya sank below the seas, blocking it off from the rest of the world. Being in the depths of the earth, the people of Enkanomiya would run into the Dragonair of the Depths, also known as the Baptismal Visheps. The Visheps harbored animosity towards the humans and would often attack and consume them. Luckily, the people learned that the Visheps hated the light, so they would use lanterns to chase away the Visheps. However, this wasn't an effective method of scaring away these creatures, so the people cried out to the Primordial One and its 3 shades, but they would not receive a response from their creator. Just when all hope was lost, the god of time, also known as Kairos, Istaroth, and Tokoyo Okami, would come to their rescue. She would awaken wisdom within the sage Abrax, and he would construct a structure known as the Helios. Once completed, the Helios would bring light to the citizens of Enkanomiya, ultimately repelling the Dragonairs and saving their nation from destruction. The sage Abrax would then serve as a leader for the people for a short time. At some point, the people would attempt to find a way back to the surface of the earth, but they were blocked by some mysterious power. Because of this, the people assumed that the Primordial One had won the war above, but banned the people from returning home. As time passed, the nobles of Enkanomiya became corrupt and they would band together to find a way to secure power over the people of Enkanomiya. As the first part of their plan, they tricked the people into worshipping the Helios as a god. They then installed children as the puppet rulers of Enkanomiya. These kids would be called the Sun Children, and the nobles would manipulate them for their own selfish gain. With complete control of Enkanomiya, the nobles tricked the Sunchild into imprisoning the sage and killing him. As the Sunchild aged, the nobles feared that they would learn of their deception, so they devised a plan to circumvent this issue. They created a ritual known as the Rite of Solar Return, where the sun child before reaching maturity would be sent into the light of Helios, incinerating the sun child. After the rite was completed, the nobles would install another sun child to continue ruling over Enkanomiya. Because of the oppressive rule of the sun children, the people would come to hate their puppet rulers, not realizing the true masterminds behind Enkanomiya. Of course, all of this would come to an end with the arrival of Orobashi. After losing in the Archon War, Orobashi would flee into the Dark Sea, seeking refuge underground. At some point, a young child from Enkanomiya would discover him, and together they would overthrow the Sun Children and defeat the Dragonaires. Orobashi would serve as the people's god, and together they planned their return to the surface of Teyvat. At some point during his stay in Enkanomiya, Orobashi read a book called Before Sun and Moon. The book itself contained knowledge that was forbidden by Celestia, and the price of this knowledge was death for both him and the people of Enkanomiya. In response, Orobashi banned the book and enacted several plans to help the people of Enkanomiya forget their past. Various books, texts, and research were sealed away and forgotten about by the people of Enkanomiya. Once this was completed, Orobashi created Watatsumi Island by breaking off coral from his body to create an island for his people. The day before the people relocated to the surface of Teyvat, an envoy of Khaenri'ah found its way into Enkanomiya and attempted to take the book Before Sun and Moon by force. Unfortunately, they were not successful as a man named Ante intervened, preventing them from securing the book. Once they reached the surface, Orobashi placed a seal on Enkanomiya, preventing the people from returning to their underground home. Remembering his sentence of death from Celestia, he would embark on a fake mission to take Yashiori Island, where he was promptly executed by the Raiden Shogun. This concludes the story of Enkanomiya and leads up to the present-day events with the Traveler and Paimon. So obviously there's a lot to unpack here, and I want to kick off our analysis and discussion with the creation story of Teyvat. Now, before we get into the rest of the video, I would just like y'all to know that I won't be really covering the topic of the Viships and the Dragonair in this video, as I'm saving that for a video in the future that I'll make on Kokomi, Albedo, and the Dragons, so look forward to that in the near future. Anyways, back to the topic at hand, the creation of the world of Teyvat. In my opinion, the most interesting figure that we learn of from Enkanomiya is the Primordial One. Now, up until this point in the video, I've been pretty careful when it comes to naming the Primordial One simply because we actually aren't sure of their true identity. The narrator of the Byakuya Koku collection confirms this, stating that the Primordial One may have been Faunus. Because of this, it casts some doubt as to whether the Primordial One is truly Faunus or not. With that out of the way, let's just assume that Faunus is indeed the Primordial One mentioned in the lore entry. As with much of Enkanomiyan lore, Faunus and the Primordial One seem to have been inspired from ancient Greece. Now, the interesting thing about Faunus is that he was not part of the mainstream belief system for the ancient Greeks. Instead, Faunus was part of something known as the Orphic Cosmogony, which was a smaller, lesser-known religious sect of ancient Greece. According to the Orphic tradition, Faunus hatched from a cosmic egg. In some traditions, this cosmic egg was brought about through the intervention of Kronos, the god of time, and Ananke, the god of inevitability. After hatching from this egg, Faunus would go on to creating the universe, which ties back into the lore entry describing the creation of the world of Teyvat. In the lore entries regarding Faunus, we know that they created 4 shining shades to help in their battle against the 7 sovereigns. After their victory over the Dragon Lords, Faunus would set off creating heaven and earth. Now, the interesting thing here is that Faunus didn't do this alone. According to the lore entry, the Primordial One and one of its shades created the birds of the air, the beasts of the earth, and the fish of the sea. Together, they also created flowers, grass, and trees, before finally creating humans, our ancestors, numerous as the stars in the sky, uncountable as the sand on the shore. Something to note here is that Faunus created the world with only one of his shades. If we reference the Orphic tradition of Greek mythology, Faunus would not only create the universe, but they would also have one daughter, Nyx, the goddess of the night. Together they would create the day and night cycle, with Faunus representing the light of the day and Nyx representing the darkness of the night. Going back to Genshin lore, I believe that the one shade that Faunus created the universe with is Nyx. While it appears that Nyx played a major role in the creation of Teyvat, it sounds like something happened to her, which is why we go from 4 shades to 3. At this point, we have zero information in terms of the lore as to what exactly happened, but I have my own personal guess here. And that is that Nyx becomes the Night Mother, who is referenced in the lore book The Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies. As part of the creation mythos of Genshin Impact, Faunus supposedly creates a covenant with the humans. According to this covenant or agreement, the people must resist temptation. However, the author notes that the seeds of temptation had already been planted from the very beginning. In the story of Adam and Eve, temptation is what eventually leads to sin and the corruption of mankind. Now, according to the Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies, the Night Mother was the source of all sins. Given that temptation can lead to sin, this could possibly mean that Nyx, or the Night Mother, may have done something to break the people's covenant with Faunus. As to her motivations behind this action, I'm not exactly sure, but it could explain why the number of shades goes from 4 to 3. Perhaps some disagreement with Faunus resulted in her banishment to the Land of the Night. That being said, there's not a whole lot of evidence for my theory, and there's another pretty mainstream theory that proposes that the 4th shade is actually Kairos, also called Istaroth, but we'll get to that later in the video, so just hold your horses for now. With the Night Mother out of the way, that leaves the 3 shades, which I believe are the 3 Moon Sisters mentioned in the lore book, The Moonlit Bamboo Forest. I actually covered the story of the Moon Sisters in my Surumi Island mural analysis video, so if y'all haven't checked it out, I highly recommend you do so. The 3 Moon Sisters appear to correspond to the Greek triple goddess called Hecate, also known as Trivia. In the Greek pantheon, she was known as the goddess of crossroads, witchcraft, and death. Hecate was most often portrayed as the maiden, mother, and crone. The maiden was often associated with purity and innocence, the mother with power and fertility, and the crone with wisdom and death. According to various sources in Genshin lore, the Moon Sisters served as guides to the Seelies and humans. This appears to align with what we learn from Enkanomiya. Because of this, I believe that Faunus and Nyx created the Seelies. With the absence of Nyx, Faunus then tasked the Moon Sisters and Seelies with helping out and guiding humanity. However, this would all come to an end with the second throne of heaven. Though not explicitly stated, I believe that this second throne of heaven is Celestia. The lore entries for Enkanomiya state that with the arrival of Celestia, the heavens collapsed, and the earth was rent asunder. Our ancestors and their ancestral land fell into this place during that conflict. In the lore entries regarding the Seelies and Moon Sisters, we hear about a similar disaster where the earth is destroyed and the heavens shatter. Here are some excerpts from the records of Dreyun. Just 30 days later, a sudden disaster struck. The Seelie and their lover fled into exile as the world collapsed around them, fleeing until the terrible calamity caught up with them and seized them. Another entry from the Moonlit Bamboo Forest also adds to this, saying, "With time, disasters overturned the sovereign carriage and laid ruin to the halls of the stars." Now, those lore entries by themselves don't necessarily confirm that the events we uncover are the exact same as those outlined in the Byakuya Koku collection, but the similarities are definitely there. Additionally, if we take a look at the murals from both Dragonspine and Surumi Island, they also seem to depict this same event. First of all, the art styles of both murals are pretty much the same, which ties back to the unified culture that existed in the past. I would also like to note that the Dragonspine mural appears to depict the sun bleeding, with Celestia appearing in front of it. This could possibly hint at the conflict between Faunus and the Second Throne. The Surumi Island murals depict the other side of the conflict, which involved the Moon Sisters. In one of the murals on the ceilings of the ruins, we can clearly see what appears to be a bleeding moon. When we bring all of this evidence together, it points to the idea that these lore entries and murals are referring to the same event. Now later on in the lore book for Enkanomiya, the author speculates that Faunus won the war against the Second Throne. But given what we know about the conflict involving the Moon Sisters, that doesn't appear to be the case. In fact, I actually think that Faunus lost the conflict against Celestia, but that's pretty obvious given the current situation in Teyvat. Now, before we move on to the topic of Enkanomiya and Orobashi, I would like to talk about Kairos, the god of time. According to the author of the Byakuya Koku collection, Kairos, or Istaroth, was the only god who responded to their cries for help. Now, in the Greek pantheon, there are 3 gods of time. The first is Kronos, who is the god of linear time. Then there's Aeon, the god of cyclical time, basically events that occur over and over again, like the seasons. And lastly, there's Kairos, the god of the opportune time, specifically the moment an action must be taken. This is important because the Byakuya Koku collection specifically states that she was the moment, she was every moment. She was the measure of 1,000 winds and the sun and the moon. She was every second of joy, every moment of rage, every instant of longing, every minute of obsession. She was every flash of delirium. We call her Kairos, or the ruler of the unchanging world. Interestingly, when the Enkanomians needed her the most, Kairos appeared and bestowed wisdom upon the great sage Abrax. After completing this, it appears that she vanished. Throughout our journey in Genshin, there's been a lot of references to the idea of time. In Mondstadt, we learn that the people once worshipped Venti alongside the god of time. Additionally, in the We Will Be Reunited questline, the traveler's sibling emphasizes the fact that they've always had time. But what does all of this mean? Well, let's backtrack to the creation of Teyvat and Faunus. As I stated earlier, according to the Orphic tradition, Faunus was born from a cosmic egg created by Kronos, the god of time, and Ananke, the god of inevitability. At least to me, this seems to hint at the idea that time transcends all creation. The people of Enkanomiya seem to recognize this fact as well. If Faunus never broke the egg's shell at the moment he did, the world would have never been created. Additionally, the Enkanomians recognize the fact that Kairos transcends every moment of time, essentially stating that she's everywhere at all times. Lastly, they call her the primordial child and the mother of 14 billion years. So what am I trying to say here? Well, first of all, I don't think Kairos is one of the shades. It just doesn't seem to line up. Given what we know, I believe that time transcends all the forces and divine beings within Teyvat, and that Kairos stands separate to all of this. It's even possible that she is the catalyst for all the events that have occurred thus far. I know it probably sounds crazy, but I really do think that there's something else going on here. Let me know what your thoughts are on this down in the comments section below. Okay, so now that we've gotten through the creation story, let's talk about Enkanomiya. When I first played through Enkanomiya, I was super confused about the story, but it turns out it's actually pretty simple. At its core, the lore of Enkanomiya is a story about how easily humans can be corrupted by greed and power. This corruption led a group of nobles to install the Sun Children as puppet rulers. Eventually, the people would grow sick of this regime of nobles and they would attempt to overthrow them, but would ultimately fail. It wouldn't be until the arrival of Orobashi that the people would be able to overthrow the nobles and return to the surface of Teyvat. Something really interesting to note here is that the story of Enkanomiya is very similar to that of Mondstadt and its nobles. After defeating Decorabian, the noble houses of Mondstadt would lead the people, but over time they would become corrupt, just like the nobles of Enkanomiya. They would enslave the people, and eventually Venti and Vanessa would band together to overthrow their regime. With that being said, the story of Enkanomiya is pretty straightforward. However, there were 2 things that I found particularly interesting when it came to the lore, and they are Orobashi and the envoy from Khaenri'ah. So let's start with Orobashi. Now I don't know about you guys, but Orobashi's story is just so tragic. This guy really couldn't catch a break. So first he loses in the Archon War and has to run away to hide away from the gods in Celestia. Then he discovers the people of Enkanomiya and becomes their god. After that, he literally rips off coral from his body to form Watatsumi Island so his people have a home, and then he discovers some sort of forbidden knowledge, is sentenced to death, and goes on a suicide mission where A executes him. And this is exactly what I wanted to talk about. During the various questlines and lore entries within Enkanomiya, we come to learn that the information contained within the book Before Sun and Moon is forbidden. However, the people of Enkanomiya existed for years knowing this information without consequence. It wasn't until Orobashi reads this book that Enkanomiya and Orobashi are both sentenced to death. This obviously made me question how Celestia would know that Orobashi came into contact with this information. My initial theory was that the book Before Sun and Moon was an info hazard. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, the idea of an info hazard comes from the SCP universe. Essentially, it's information or knowledge that puts an individual into danger or enables some other agent or being to cause harm. Therefore, according to this theory, just reading the book would alert Celestia and sentence an individual to death. However, this isn't a good theory as the people of Enkanomiya knew about this information for many years before Orobashi came. Because of this, I think it's likely that Celestia may have some passive connection with the gods of Teyvat. Through this connection with the gods, Celestia may be able to monitor their activities, and this might explain how they came to know of the book's existence. But even then, this theory isn't foolproof and doesn't explain how A was able to cut contact with Celestia. An alternate explanation is that Celestia saw Orobashi forming Watatsumi Island, and that is how they became aware of the book. In order to save his people, Orobashi then entered into negotiations with Celestia, promising to seal away the book and offer himself as a sacrifice. However, again, this theory has issues as it messes up with the timeline and doesn't seem to be very characteristic of Celestia. As you can tell, this still kind of confuses me, but if you guys have a better explanation, feel free to let me know down in the comments below. Lastly, let's talk about the envoy from Khaenri'ah. So the day before Enkanomiya's transfer to the surface, an envoy of Khaenri'ah made their way into Enkanomiya. Apparently, this envoy wanted to obtain a copy of Before Sun and Moon. The people of Enkanomiya resisted Khaenri'ah's demands, and a man named Ante even sacrificed himself to protect the book. This is actually a huge lore reveal because it indicates the possibility that there are other civilizations that are buried underground. We know that in the past there existed a single unified culture of humans. During the war against the Second Throne, many of those cities were destroyed, but it's likely that a few of those cities sank underground, like Enkanomiya. Khaenri'ah could have been one of those cities that sank below the surface. Since they were all spread out, these cities may not have been aware of each other's existence. Over time, they would develop technology, and at least from the Antigonius questline, it sounds like Khaenri'ah may have conducted expeditions to other underground cities. It's something really interesting to consider, and maybe we'll come into contact with other cities that remained underground, like Enkanomiya. And that is pretty much it for today's video. It was another long one, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and sorry if it was super rambly. There was just so much to talk about, and I wasn't sure how to organize the information. Also, before I close this video, I just want to say thank you so much for 1K subs. I actually had no idea I could make it this far in terms of my videos, and I am forever grateful for your support over the past few months. You have no idea how much it means to me, and I'm just really thankful and grateful that I'm even here on this channel. Anyways, if you guys like this video, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Also, let me know what your thoughts are on Enkanomiya down in the comments section below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace!